The Magnus Carlsen Online Invitational Tournament on Chess24 came to a dramatic conclusion today with the final. Magnus Carlsen himself and Hikaru Nakamura, who's a real blitz, rapid and online chess specialist. It was really a worthy final. Game 1, Magnus Carlsen won in trademark style, grinding down Hikaru in a long endgame. Game 2, Hikaru hit back with a beautiful strategic win. So 1-1, and now I'm going to show you Game 3. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us on PayPal or patreon.com. You'll find links down there somewhere, or maybe even up there, who knows. So Carlsen with the white pieces in this third game. And no London system today. He's playing a main line here, and it's the bishop f4 queen's gambit decline, which is almost like the opening of the tournament. I mean, it is so popular in top tournaments these days. And Hikaru went with knight d7. Well, looks like he wants a taste of his own medicine, because this was the line that he defeated Magnus in game 2. So who knows what he had up his sleeve. But I mean, it's a bit passive for black, and yeah, Magnus lost by, yeah, basically it was a game with where only 2 results were possible. You know, Magnus was fighting for a draw for a lot of it. So it's surprising that Magnus didn't go for c5, but anyway, he went for bishop e2, which is, well, also quite a popular line at the moment. And, well, there are several specialists in this system, and it looks quite modest, but actually there's some sting to it. Grishuk is maybe the leading exponent of this move. Ding plays it as well, Aronian, I mean, and, well, Magnus as well. So the point is that after this, you don't recapture immediately, you play castles. And, well, the main line, you could say, goes a6. And after c5, here's the point. You see, you've delayed capturing here, and you actually play pawn to d5. And that gives white a little advantage, but it's tricky. But instead of that, c5 straight away by Nakamura. And this was taken. And bishop takes c4. So it looks like a pretty calm position. But one of these typical queen's pawn positions where the c and d files are open. And then it's going to be a fight to see who can get their rooks there quicker than the other. So, for example, if white had a couple of moves here, you'd want to play queen e2, rooks into the middle, and then life is uncomfortable for the queen. It's not so easy for black to develop in this position when that bishop strikes across here. a6. So black is preparing to strike out with b5 and then to play bishop b7. Knight g5. Now that's a very good move. And this was played, well, just a few months ago in quite an important game. So there's a couple of things. Well, as we can see, these pieces are pointing at the e6 pawn. But there's more than that. That knight could well spin back to e4. So, for example, if queen e7, then knight e4. And that's uncomfortable for black because something could easily land on d6. So knight g5 has just been played. And, well, Hikaru seemed a bit confused at this moment. Thought for 3.5 minutes here. Now that's quite a chunk of time in rapid play. And played b5. But as I said, this has actually been played a few months ago in the FIDE Grand Prix in Jerusalem. So this is a game between Wojtaszek and Andreikin. And there Andreikin played the queen to e8. And, well, let's just have a quick look. Queen e8, knight takes f8, bishop d6, important to exchange those bishops off. And white had rook and 2 pawns against bishop and knight, and, well, seems like decent chances, although the game ended in a draw. But queen e7 played instead in this game by Nakamura. And Carlsen took the rook and then played knight e4, so that's a good move. Attacking that bishop on c5, and if it drops back to e7, then knight d6, and that hampers black's development. So knight e4 just played. So, oh, of course, if knight takes knight, then queen d5 check with a double attack. So after knight e4, bishop b7 played. So Nakamura develops the queen's bishop, very good. And knight takes bishop, queen takes. So let's look at the material balance. We've got, again, this situation where white has rook and 2 pawns against 2 knights, 2 minor pieces. So quite unbalanced, but in this kind of situation, if the minor pieces don't have really good outposts, then that's a problem. It's not so much the material, the pawn count, but it's whether these pieces have long-term footholds. Now, well, the knight on d7 is protected for the moment, but still could be better for the pieces because there are no centre pawns. And more than that, white is able to get the major pieces in very quickly, and that rook wants to land down on c7, which will be very nasty. Queen d5. Queen and bishop threaten mate in 1. Now, if the queens are exchanged, then this one perhaps isn't so clear, because black will play a5, and the bishop is on a good position on d5, nicely protected, and black threatens to play a4 to get some play against those pawns. So Carlsen, I think, played an excellent move here. He played f3. Well, of course, that defends against the mate on g2. I mean, that's obvious in a sense, but the point is he's actually prepared to give up a pawn to take the initiative. So now he's got time to play e4, blocking out the bishop on b7. And that means that bishop on b7 not really on the best square now, because white is threatening to hassle it with rook c7. So, you know, this is a very nice idea from Carlsen to take the initiative. So knight f8 from Nakamura. And here is another really excellent move from Carlsen. The obvious move we want to make here is rook c7, but then knight e6, and that one's not so clear actually. Black certainly has some counterplay. That queen can come back into the game. That knight on f4 is pretty annoying for white. So after knight f8, what did Carlsen play? Well, he found an excellent move, rook f2. Looks very modest. In fact, this rook is going to swing into play. So, for example, if queen e6, then rook d2. Now, the point is that, yes, it might be possible to play the rook to c7, but, you know, knight there can, well, that covers the c7 square. But white can get in on the 8th rank. That's why that rook move to d2 was so important. And that, again, is pretty nasty. Oh, except not in this position. I've just seen queen b6 check. I've managed to construct something beautifully where I managed to lose a rook. Okay, we better go back. Well, maybe we'll tuck our king away first. That was good. Yeah, and then hopefully we can play rook d8. So let's go back. That was good. So rook f2, that's the idea, basically, that this rook can come into play very quickly on the d file. So rook c8. Nakamura exchanges off that rook in the corner, and, well, he wants to try and bring this bishop to a better square as well. But, you know, exchanging rooks usually in this kind of situation is what the rook wants. It's a bit similar when you're playing against when you're the exchange up, but you know, when you're playing with rook against two minor pieces, usually good to exchange a pair of rooks. And now the queen came in. Queen e6 covers that bishop. And bishop d6. So this is looking pretty nasty for black already. Queen e8. Got to offer the exchange of queens. I mean, black can't hold out like in that situation. So queen exchange, and now an excellent move, bishop b4, just making sure that those pawns are just held back for the moment. You know, if black could find counterplay quickly by advancing those pawns, that would be a different story. But so bishop b4, excellent move. Now I've got a situation where it's now only rook and pawn against two knights, but white has the f and e pawns, and if they can start rolling down the board, in particular if we can get, you know, something like the pawn to f5 and then supported with a king coming to f4, and then the g pawn advances, well, and then the rook comes into black's position, that would be winning. So over the next few moves, Nakamura has to try and prevent those pawns from advancing. Carlsen plays rook d2, and of course that prepares the king's march into the middle of the board. So the king completely secure here behind that wall of pawns. And when the moment is right, then white is going to advance the f pawn. F and e pawn together. So g5, absolutely necessary. Rook d6, the rook comes in, and that is very useful for white. So you can see the rook might come over here, might hassle the bishop, might come this way, but it's lurking in a very nasty way. So knight d7 and g3. So preparing to play f4. So knight e5. Now watch out for a fork. Let's stop that. b3, h5. Now we don't want to play this too quickly because knight g4 check. Carlsen is very responsible and make sure he doesn't rush things because he's in control of this position. The moment black doesn't have any counterplay. So he played h4. This is excellent. So that kind of provokes a crisis because once this pawn is knocked out, then at some moment, then f4 can be played. So pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. So sooner or later, f4 is going to come. I think in this position, see, it's threat because knight g4 could be met by king f3, and then the pawn would advance. So knight g6 to hold back white's pawn coming to f4. And the h-pawn is threatened, so therefore bishop e1. And the bishop is going to bounce around to g3, and once again f4, f5, and that's basically just a winning position. You can see it's what I mentioned right at the start of the video. If those minor pieces don't have secure posts, they will just get pushed back, and you know that'll be the end of it. So a5. So this is a clever bit of counterplay from Nakamura. He's looking to distract white. So if bishop takes pawn, then knight takes pawn on h4, and yeah, that might be a little bit tricky. So Carlsen needs to do something else, but he has a good move. Rook d5, everything under control. That's a nice move. Feels like all those pawns are vulnerable. a4, so Nakamura desperately trying to get some counterplay here. Now this is a very cool move from Magnus. He could exchange here and then take on h5. I just wonder, I think this is good for white. But maybe he didn't want it that pawn could be protected. Don't know, it's hard to say. But he went really flashy here. He played rook takes pawn on h5. Now, if pawn takes pawn, well, there's a few things, but either bishop c3 or rook takes pawn on b5. And a3 as well. A3, well, it's under control, either with the bishop or with rook takes pawn. Knight ef4, so Nakamura is trying to stir things up. Rook g5, nice move, preventing knight g2 check. And after this, does this look scary? No, Carlsen had it under control. h5, attacking the knight. So if the pawn advances, you take with check, and then rook takes pawn, everything's fine. So knight f8, and bishop here. Yeah, of course, in this case, king takes knight would allow knight e6 check. So bishop c3. Let's stop this pawn. And actually, this bishop is on such a brilliant diagonal. Not only covering squares across the board on the king's side, but of course stopping the pawn as well. And actually that bishop is really secure on c3. That knight can't lay a glove on it, basically. Can't lay a glove on the bishop. b4, of course not taking, then b2, so bishop b2, but everything under control still. And if this knight were to retreat, then just rook here. That rook cleans up the pawns very, very quickly. So after bishop b2, knight 8 e6, rook f5 check. I mean, there really is nothing better for black, and Carlsen simply took here, reaching a winning endgame. I mean, these pawns play no part in the game at all. They're blockaded, and it's basically 3 pawns up for white on the king's side. Yeah, there's really nothing to do here. I mean, the king could come to h7, then king e5, and it's a winning position. You just shepherd those pawns down the board, king f6, and then the pawn advances. So back here, bishop a6, and now the king can even support that h-pawn. The threat is to play h6, h7, and Nakamura had to bring the bishop back so just in time so that he could check on e8, but of course it makes no difference at this point. Those pawns are just rolling through. Don't even have to be too careful here about a blockade. And king e7 was the final move of the game, of course. Nothing to stop that pawn rolling through. So that was a really convincing game by Magnus Carlsen, giving him a 2-1 lead. So they still had game 4 to play. Not an easy one. I mean, Carlsen looked like he was equalising, but Nakamura played very well indeed. Got, well, very clear advantage in an endgame, possibly winning, but Magnus hung on after some inaccuracies by Hikaru Nakamura. So Magnus Carlsen won it 2.5, 1.5, but it was not an easy final. And well, it was a really good spectacle. So Magnus Carlsen wins $70,000, taken from his own company. You can look upon it as a dividend, I guess. But it was entertaining throughout the whole event. Some great players, some great games, real tension. I think we've all enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it too, my coverage. There's going to be more on the PowerPlayChess channel coming soon, so look out for that. But I might take a break for 2 or 3 days. before posting again. Thanks for watching.